brace yourself because today I'm going on the attack. I'm going to take down one of the worst pieces of writing advice out there. Stick around so you can find out what it is. What's up guys, my name is Brandon McNulty, I'm a writer and welcome to my writing channel. Today I want to talk about a piece of writing advice that is just driving me up a wall. I am sick of hearing this, and I'm particularly sick of the fact that I hear it mostly from agents and editors, you know, the gatekeepers of the publishing world. And what they say, and oftentimes I will see this on Twitter, I'll see it on submission guidelines, I will see it in a lot of places. What they say is that you should always open up your story with your protagonist. You should always open up with a scene including your main character. No exceptions. That main character has to be in the opening scene no matter what. To which I say, nah, you don't need to do that. It's garbage advice, and honestly, I don't understand why agents and editors are pushing it so hard nowadays. It's getting pretty ridiculous. I feel like every time I see an agent or an editor on Twitter, they're like, please send me the first 5 pages of your story so I can get a good understanding of who your main character is. And if you're one of those types of writers who opens up with the villain, or maybe your main character doesn't appear until page 6, or whatever the reason is, I mean, you're kind of put on the spot there, because it's like, well, do I send this agent, do I send them a chapter maybe later on in the story where the main character does appear, or do I send them that first chapter and risk them being upset, or risk them thinking that I didn't pay attention to their submission requirements? I mean, there's a lot of problems that can be created with this, and I just think it's got to stop. And the reason why it's got to stop is because you don't need to open with your main character. You can open with a villain, a side character. There's so many different possibilities. Now, as for deciding which character should open up your story, I've got 3 tips for you today. Now, the first one, I would recommend opening up with the character who is most interesting at the beginning of your story. Now, this can be your main character. Perhaps your main character has an interesting job, or they have some personality quirks that make them interesting, or they're performing some act at the beginning of the story that makes them interesting. Whatever it is, that's fine. But if your villain is more interesting, or your side character, or whoever, consider opening with them. Now, for the second tip, I'd recommend finding a character who brings conflict to the story right off the bat. Oftentimes this can be the villain. Sometimes your main character can be someone who brings conflict to the story, particularly if they're pursuing a goal right from the start. If they want something and they're not going to let anyone stop them, your main character very well might be someone who brings this conflict to the story, who promises a future conflict to come, because conflict is what keeps us moving through the story. But whoever you start with, make sure they bring something to the story that signals conflict or brings it right up front. And then the third tip I would give you, try to open up with a character and a scene that helps convey the tone of your story. For instance, if you're writing a thriller, a real gritty story, you want to open up your story with a scene that's gritty and exciting. You don't want to open up with perhaps a main character who's a retired cop just sitting around his house doing nothing. I mean, if you introduce a villain in the first chapter of that story, and you show the villain doing some crazy shit and just tearing the place apart, and then you introduce that retired cop, then all of a sudden the reader's going to be rooting for that retired cop to just get out of retirement and stop the bad guy who was introduced in scene 1. I mean, it's real simple. And whenever you're setting a tone for a story, you're making a promise to the reader. You're saying that, hey, guess what? Chapter 1, that was exciting. There's going to be way more excitement over the course of the story. Just stick with me. We're going to have a lot of interesting characters who are full of conflict. And trust me, I've set the tone now, and it's going to be maintained throughout the course of the story. To me, it's much more important to open up with a character who is interesting, who drives conflict into the story, and who sets the tone for the story to come, than it is to just introduce any old main character for the sake of introducing the main character. Now, granted, I'm not an agent, I'm not an editor, I'm just McNulty, so what do I know? Well, actually, one thing I do know is that I have enjoyed a lot of stories through the years that open up with a character other than the main protagonist. I know, shocking, right? Well, I'm just going to give you a few examples today just so you understand that it is possible to open up a story with a villain or a side character or whoever. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, what is one piece of writing advice that has been driving you up the wall recently? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for me. Share this video with a friend if you don't mind. And as always, remember to keep on writing.